Welcome everyone out to the video that is going to cover buffers as a part of the Takt production system series. In this video, we're going to cover some different concepts in relation to buffers and why we should have them. So in this opening slide, I want to show you a norm level schedule for the example that we've been using and show that during holidays and throughout the sequences and at the end, we should always have buffers in our Takt plans. And that's because the focus of Takt as a nimble system is to be able to absorb delays and variation so that you can still finish your projects on time. And it's a normal part of the system. Every schedule and construction should have buffers. So let me take you through this video. So here are the buffers that we recommend using inside the system. This is called the calculated end buffer. The calculated end buffer is the buffer at the end of the schedule that is based on the number of days needed to cover your risks. So these buffers at the end should cover the risks of the actual days. The takt time buffer, this is my second favorite buffer type. This is where you have a buffer or an interruption in the actual takt time or the calendar itself. And this is used to stop the work of the train in the phase and pause. So you'll use takt time buffers for things like holidays, weather days, project closures, things like that. The other one is the takt wagon buffer. Now, I do want to be clear here. This buffer will be separate from the buffers that you're going to be using for your risks. Inside the sequence itself, you are going to want 5 to 20% of the overall sequence duration. You will want to have 5 to 20% buffers packaged within the sequence itself. And here is my point with that. When you are packaging buffers within the actual sequence itself, you don't want too much buffer because then you have workers waiting on work, right? Workers with nothing to do. You don't want too little buffer where you have work waiting on workers, where you're really over capacity and you don't have the time to accomplish your work. You really want optimized buffers where you have just the amount of buffer inside the wagons so that you can finish your work, do your training, clean the area right, and have optimal flow without too much dependency. So let's keep going with a couple of other buffers here. This is called the sequence buffer. This is not my favorite, but it still works pretty decently. And typically you will use this when you want to ensure that the first half of the phase is going to go well, and you want to buffer between the latter half of the phase. And that happens every now and then. But the point is that we want to have buffers in our system. So using all of those different types, we want to do a risk analysis. And in this risk analysis, you come up with your different risks as a project team and how many days that risk could affect your schedule and obviously also how much it would cost. So we are not going to add those up, meaning, 3 plus 2 plus 5. We're going to take the largest number because a lot of times risks will happen concurrently. So you'll take the largest risk and you'll make sure that you have a corresponding buffer count. So if we have 5 days of risk, you'll want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buffers that can absorb that. The buffers actually in the sequence will be separate and be between 5 to 20%. And just remember, the holiday is there to buffer the holiday itself. So it does not include, should not be included in the actual buffer count completely for the total to cover the risks. And then the takt wagon buffer is not included because it's just a part of the actual sequence itself. So what we're looking for is in our schedule to have buffers throughout to create a complete schedule. So again, the buffers in the sequence, the buffers at the end, the buffers in the takt time. If you have those in the right proportions, then you have a correct schedule with a correct overall total project duration between the start and the completion date, which is important, or else we're going to overburden our trades, our workers, and our foremen, which we do not want to do. The reason this is important is because CPM does not do that. So if you have a sequence in CPM, it's going to run the longest path or the critical path and provide a schedule that does not have buffers and it will force you to do trade stacking, trade burdening, or to start at a minimum rushing and pushing and panicking, which will extend the overall total project duration. Takt is different because it's always optimized with the right number of zones so that you can have buffers. So if somebody said, "Hey, Jason, what's the difference between a CPM schedule and a takt plan? Why do takt plans have buffers?" Well, because when we use Little's law, we're able to gain time from the promised target duration or the target end date. We are able to actually gain buffers in the system, and that's why Takt is a nimble system, not a fixed system like CPM. And so this is a graph that's very important to me. Let me explain this right now. When you target a Takt plan with buffers, I might add, and a little bit of buffers at the end, and you target that end date with the owner, typically what we see over hundreds and hundreds of projects and with our clients is that you will, even if you experience a delay, be able to finish on or about 5% ahead of schedule, meaning finish ahead, and still be able to comply with your contractual end date. When you have a CPM and you have rushed and pushed, even if that CPM undercuts or targets an earlier date, because it does not have buffers in the system, it will extend, it will panic the team. And these schedules typically, and I will say by about 58 days, on average throughout the United States at least, will push past the completion date. So if you are stable, you have a chance to absorb delays and finish on time. If you are too aggressive without buffers, you will panic and it will extend past the target completion date. As we continue our discussion about buffers, I also want to talk to you about buffers in the supply chain. So let me pivot to a little bit of a different topic here and explain that when we have activities like 1 through 4, and when the trade partners, and I'm not being critical, but when they sandbag and they put buffers inside their activities, and we don't also put those buffers in the supply chain for our material procurement, that is very dangerous, and I'll tell you why. If activities 1, 2, 3, and 4 end up not needing those buffers, they will start to move forward. So if you look at activity 3 here, it came forward, but because we didn't also put a buffer in the supply chain, now the materials are not ready. And so buffers are even needed in the supply chain. So check this out. If you are going to have buffers inside the activities, right, you should also have buffers in the supply chain. And so that if you don't need those buffers and activity 3 comes forward, you're still fine because you had buffers in the supply chain. So the proper use of buffers throughout your schedule is just crucial. So let's talk about some of the things that we can do with buffers. So let's say you have a delay shown here in this picture, right? And the takt wagon that is represented here in the color blue starts to push. If you leave it this way, now you are going to experience the series of production losses that come from trade stacking and trade burdening that we have already talked about in these videos. So we don't want to do that. What we would rather do is actually just experience that delay and cascade that delay so that the blue wagon can then drive this other blue wagon and we can eat into the buffer. So instead of 6 buffers, now we have 4, and the actual crews can go work on workable backlog. Another way to do this, if you have a delay, like let's say for instance right here, instead of stacking, which is the root cause of most of our problems, it will take us away from trade flow and really extend our schedule and cause a lot of chaos and reduce our productivity to where it's just not worth it to try and stack. One of the other things that we can do is what's called a cascaded sequence delay, where we cascade that and maybe we don't actually need to use workable backlog. Maybe we just pause and the start date for the green takt wagon can push and drive the rest of the wagons and we still go eat into those buffers. So I think you're seeing a pattern here. We use buffers to absorb delays. That's it. We're going to have delays. The thing that we can't do is absorb delays by making trades work in multiple areas or all work in the same area when they don't belong doing so. Here's another example. If you have a delay here, right, with the green and the blue, one of the things you can do is switch your sequence and switch the blue and the green. Obviously, you would have to switch your supply chain. So again, that's a good argument for having buffers in the supply chain. But this is called a sequence delay, where we actually change the sequence to absorb the delay. Another one, if you have a delay here in the sequence, is that you can actually pull out the delay and put it onto a scrum board and detach it from the actual area itself. So if we go back to the image before, let's say that just this one wagon in just this one zone is delayed, then you would pull it out onto its own scrum board or even its own pull plan, and you would say, hey, this area is just in this zone, just in that one wagon. We will detach it from the rest of the system. Here's another thing that you can do. Let's say that the blue wagon is delayed, and it really isn't too dependent with the purple wagon. You can recover that and get it back on track by helping that contractor get back on track and being patient and negotiating with the blue and the purple Takt wagons so that they can work in the same area without affecting each other, meaning that they're not doing anything unnatural. They're not doing anything where they're stacked on top of each other. They're not doing anything unsafe, and they can naturally work together to recover that wagon. And so also I want to suggest that if you have a delay here in the green wagon, you can also, and this is at the end of the options, because adding resources comes with complications, meaning that it can, like I've already talked about, reduce your production, but you can supplement with another crew. Okay. If you have a delay here in the green Takt wagon, you can pull labor from workable backlog to recover that delay so that you don't have to eat into your buffers. Also, if you have a delay, like we've talked about before, you can detach this wagon and put it on its own takt time, especially if it's not dependent with the successor wagon. And again, I want to say you can add an extra crew or extra labor to recover those wagons if you get into trouble. So these are some options that you can use to recover if you ever have any difficulties. And let me give you another one, is that if you have a sequence and you have a delay here, you can also, like we've already talked about, increase the number of zones or decrease your zone sizes so that you can recover at the end of the project, at the end of the schedule, at the end of the phase, and pick up time even though you've experienced a delay here. So I hope those were helpful. Buffers are designed in the system so that you can absorb delays, and those are written really well in the book, and they're labeled properly, and I highly encourage everybody to start using them. Once you have a schedule that now has proper buffers, you're going to finish the formatting. And whether this is in the macro or the norm, either one, you will have the project name, the legend, the date, and the weather durations, whether it's hot or cold months, any of your milestones, your completion dates, your phases clearly identified so people know that they're looking at phases, any QR codes that link you to resources, your zones, your interdependence ties between trades, which we will explain here in just a bit, any of your trade flows showing how your trades are moving through the areas, and your zone maps. So we're looking for full formatting once you have your buffers in your schedule. And so now you should have a schedule that not only has the trains, not only has your zones and your phases, not only has your takt time, but also has buffers in each of the phases so that you can properly complete it. So I hope you've enjoyed this video about buffers in the Takt production system.